that's when the creativity really sparks, because it's how do we solve this problem with the given resources that we have?
How do you be MacGyver and not Iron Man? Hey everybody, I'm Russ.
And I'm Danny.
And this is the Memory Makers Podcast.
The show that helps you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories.
Memory Makers Podcast. Memory Makers Podcast. I can't go lower than this because my voice will cut out.
Once again, I will say for everybody watching and listening, I don't know what Russ is going to do before we start, and it's a surprise for me every time, too. A little bit of Mario.
Would it surprise you to know that as a child, I had one of those backpacks with the monkey tail leash attached to it, just because nobody ever knew where I was going when we were out in public. So you get the emotional version of that in my adulthood. So you're welcome.
That's great. Well, you know what's cool is today, as we're recording this episode right now, this is episode number 52, which means it's a weekly episode. We've hit a year. We've been doing this podcast for a year, Russ.
We're grizzled vets, baby.
Grizzled vets.
No, it's
you make it sound like it's like we're rough and tumble.
I mean, I have cowboy boots, so I'm pretty sure they don't sell those to you unless you are, you got a little something called grit. So
yeah, cowboy boots. But do you have a bedazzled jacket to go with it?
I do not have a studded jacket, no. But Rinker is starting to get into showing some 4-H livestock and things at all of 3.5. Some kids have a golf prodigy. I'm going to have a livestock prodigy. And we've been getting him the boots and the belt buckle and the whole thing. So I'm diving into the fashion side of it. I don't know about the smells and the actual animal portions of it, but I'm bringing the flavor where we can.
Well, this has been a fun ride so far in the last year making this podcast. Thank you to everybody who watches and listens, and we work hard to bring little nuggets of value that you can take very tactical and practical things and input them into your business, into your leadership, into your life, and we want to keep that going today. We're going to talk about fans first.
Absolutely. So this is a book. The founder of Savannah Bananas put this book together, Jesse, and I'm spacing on his last name. But thank you. And so he has this really incredible viewpoint on how he tackles problems. And one, if you haven't heard of the Savannah Bananas thing, think Harlem Globetrotters meets like a funky new type of baseball, where it's got a lot of entertainment at every aspect, and music and some showmanship and some WWE wrestling-esque kind of things happening. Like, it's this really beautiful, chaotic, entertaining hot mess, and super fun that goes all over. But the team that puts this in there, they are obsessed about the customer experience. And so, we talk about that. That's a huge love language of ours. And this book is so fantastic that we thought we'd break down the main points, specifically focusing around eliminating customer friction, because that's something as well that we internally are looking at, and just that never-ending continual improvement. How do we stay obsessive about not getting complacent? How are we finding things that just bug our customers when we're working with them to find solutions? And then how do our customers, what are their needs within the products and things that help make it better, for the guests and all of that good stuff. So, starting off with the idea of eliminating friction, and we'll get into some subpoints as we go in later on, but the biggest thing for this and why it can feel challenging is you have to go step by step and think about how are they going to come across you, how are they getting to you once they're, even before they're walking through your door. What are the touch points and the impressions that they're getting from you? What's going to speak to them? What's going to be something that's unique and different? And so you're trying to see what they're going to see. You want to hear what they're going to hear. You want to anticipate those needs and wants, and then providing things that address or ease those needs or worries that they would have. So that way everything can start to feel effortless. And there are a couple of different things to look at. When you think of it in kind of the granular siloed portion of the guest experience, you can drill into what do we want the redemption counter experience to look like. The Savannah Bananas, team, when they're doing concessions, they want to make sure that there's never a wait longer than 2 minutes when they're getting the concessions, because they want to go there, they want to get that beer or that popcorn or that hot dog, and they want to get back to watching the game. When you're thinking about these different, parts of what they're doing while they're within your facility, and even before and after, thinking of things like the redemption counter, what's that wait time for a customer, that has a mom that has 3 kids trying to get through? Are they having to wait for 15 minutes before they can get up there? How do we get that down to 2 minutes? And how do we leave this with some pomp and circumstance that really puts a cap and a piece de resistance on their entire experience, because that's the last thing that they're kind of leaving with. And so what's something that then, they're going to be talking about on the drive to the car that's going to really have stuck with them, based on a fun interaction or a celebration that they get when they're leaving that redemption counter. So, the other things that are important for us to start looking at, and Danny will touch on this next one, but looking at things like what is their actual customer journey, and how do we identify friction points with that? What are ways that we can stand out and be creative in those approaches? So Danny, I'll flip it back over to you, brother.
Yeah, well, the idea of identifying those friction points goes hand in hand with what is your customer journey. And it starts at the very beginning, like you had mentioned, of what is the website look like, how easy it is to navigate, how can they find your phone number when they call, what happens, can they book stuff online when they walk in the door, if they're trying to book a party. There's every one of these steps. When they get to your counter, how easy it is for them to understand the packages, how easy is it for them to pay if they have a redemption game or a game card for the arcade, how easy is it for them to refill. Like, every one of these points that happens in your customer journey from beginning to end is important. And one of the things that can help, we all sort of inherently know in our businesses what the customer journey is, because we run the business, we understand that. But in order to truly empathize yourself with your customers, as well as have your team members empathize with your customers, role play. Have yourself, your managers, your frontline employees role play and become the customer going through every part of the journey, to see on that side of it from the customer's perspective, where are the friction points? Where does something feel like it takes way too long to accomplish? Where does it feel like it's more complicated than it needs to be? And when you can identify some of those things, it helps you, when you can put yourself in the customer's shoes and empathize with what they're feeling at any given moment, it helps you then be able to come up with ideas of, well, how do we smooth out that friction a little bit? How do we make this process easier? Because at the end of the day, if you're working a busy Saturday and you have hundreds of guests in your center and everything's super busy, we crank the volume up to 11, so to speak. And everything is a little bit more hectic. Everything's a little bit more chaotic. The stress levels are a little bit higher. And so when you can be able to remove some of those friction points through the process beforehand, when you get to those busy days, it's not as intense for the customer, and it's an enjoyable experience rather than something that they're trying to survive through with hundreds of kids running around the place. And it can help with, as you identify, we've talked on this podcast before about your decision filters and about your why, and you can really help your team members understand the decision-making process, how that impacts the customer, and what the bigger the bigger vision and the bigger why is, and how that's attached to the customer journey as well.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is so impactful to do in this stage is get real feedback from your customers, because again, when we're trying things out, there's always going to be things that we either don't anticipate or are potentially nose blind to from our own life experiences and all of that kind of thing. So being able to engage with your customers and get that feedback and actually be able to implement that, so you can see, like, is this actually executing to the level that we envision, or is there a stopgap or a disconnect somewhere that's happening? And I mean, we're even doing this now moving forward with our pieces of, hey, when you go through the experience? Like, did you have all of the resources that you needed? Did the people that were helping you make this decision and walking you through from a, sales and consulting standpoint, like where can that be better? And then as we go through the design and engineering and production stages, like, hey, how, what questions did your architect or GC have? And then even post install, hey, how can we be better with this? And so we are now starting to really look at, okay, how do we get this feedback? How do we get it back in real time so that way we can make quick adjustments to, ensure that this stays as a high fidelity piece? And so doing that with your customers as well, and coming up with ways, sometimes it's, yes, you as a manager are going to stop by a table and make sure that somebody got everything that they needed. And oh, shoot, maybe they're waiting on a straw. But how are you going a level deeper than that and really seeing how this is connecting? And are you and your team watching on the floor and seeing how these things are translating? Are you evaluating it with those filters and that mindset and tuning your radio frequency to just looking for areas of, hesitation or wait, where there are not as many smiles as you'd like to see, kind of a thing, and look and break down game film then with your team members of, okay, what would make this fun for us? What would make this fun for our guests? How do we, amp it up and take it to 11 on the fun and the engagement side to make this something really special? But then getting ways to make it easy for your guests to give you feedback, and truly having even some follow-up calls, right? Like a survey is great, but are you calling a party mom after a birthday party and getting some additional feedback and things like that? Because, you may not get responses from everybody, but the ones that have either had really good or really bad, experiences will be willing to share that information, as you know. And especially, the attraction pros guys always talk about it as well. Like bad feedback is actually a good thing because it now means that there's something that we can fix. And so just realizing that, leaning into that, and, it may feel vulnerable at times to try to get some of that feedback, but holy moly, is it not the secret sauce to really improving and fixing things that are bugging your team and bugging your guests? So beyond that, we also want to look at, how do we stand out? How do we really create something that does feel new and different, especially when there's so many different, competing eyes and attention spans and dollars that we're trying to go against for both in-home and out-of-home entertainment? What are ways that we can stand out? And, you immediately comes to mind, everybody talks about like the My Pleasure from Chick-fil-A or Cold Stone Creamery singing those things. But think about now, like those have become so ingrained in our culture because of the impact that it had at the time, and everyone still ties it to that. And so looking at what are our signature pieces that we can have, Andretti's started this whole thing where they were going to have someone open and the doors for people as they were coming in and coming out. They found a way to make that offset the labor costs and saw the positive results that came from that. Is it something with a special greeting that you have with your guests when they come? Is it something that happens when they leave the redemption store and have a grand finale celebration, for doing that? Is it something that's silly and crazy that your guests or your staff do during the briefs of attractions with laser tag? Or is it engagement that they do with mini golf? Like, what are fun and exciting and again, it doesn't have to be a $20,000 solution. It can be a $2 solution that comes from a genuine place. And so we'll talk a little bit later on about some of these other opportunities. But again, the biggest thing that I took away from this book was, we wanted to get away from, well, how can we make that a little bit better? It's, how do we make that the coolest part of the experience? Right? Like each individual thing that teams were looking at is, how do we make this the crown jewel amongst all of the other things? And when everybody's looking at that, you're getting much more of this 10x massive action type of a piece, and it allows you to think bigger. And then you can deal with the realities and tyranny of how, and we can talk about that as well, as far as, creative problem solving that goes along with that. But to me, the biggest, you don't want to bring an umbrella to a brainstorm at this portion when you're trying to figure out how to stand out, and you really should lean into it and get crazy with it.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about next is this idea of constraints foster creativity. Sometimes we think, well, in order to be creative with anything, we need ultimate freedom, as much freedom as possible. That's where creativity comes from. But the problem is, when you have too much freedom on any given idea, it's actually harder to come up with creative solutions. It's when you give yourself constraints and limitations and rules and bounds to work within, that's when the creativity really sparks, because it's how do we solve this problem with the given resources that we have.
How do you be MacGyver and not Iron Man?
Exactly. Well, he's a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's true.
Iron Man is kind of a little bit of both.
He built it in a cave with a box of scraps. So,
exactly.
Anyway, but think of that. Like, can we do this with a paperclip and a piece of gum and save the day? Like, or do we need to buy an entire thing? Like, anyway, old pop culture references aside.
There's always this idea of, oh, well, if we only had more cash or more money to be able to solve this problem, it would be easier. And I think it's helpful to approach problems and challenges as how do we outthink our competition instead of outspending them? How do we outthink others in order to create something special instead of throwing money at something to create something special? Obviously, at the end of the day, every business needs cash to operate, need cash to be able to reinvest and do all of these things. But when we have kind of constraints on what we can spend or how we can approach certain problems, it allows us to really get creative on some of those solutions. And one of the ideas that he talks about in the book is to experiment, tweak, and try. I was talking with some of the folks over at Grand Station Entertainment recently, and one of their managers was telling me that one of the things that they will consistently do with their team is when their team members, whether they're a frontline employee or a supervisor or a manager, come up with ideas, the immediate reaction is, let's give it a try. They always kind of bias toward, let's give it a try, let's give it a try, let's give it a try, because they're willing to experiment. And one of the things he talks about in the book is you either get a win or you get a story, because if something fails and doesn't go well, you'll get a story, and you'll probably also get a really valuable lesson out of that as well. We can sometimes look down upon the idea of failures, but when we think about failures as a lesson learned, and it's one of the most data-rich points that we can experience is failure. We're going to learn a whole lot more from that than we will ever from success. It kind of removes the burden of experimentation a little bit, and let's try it. And if it fails, great. What did we learn, and what's the story? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up, because I sometimes talk to operators who say this to me, is that they'll look at their local community and they'll say, oh my gosh, we have a big giant corporate competitor with tons and tons of money and tons of resources, and all they do is see the downside about having one of those in their market. I like to remind them that when you have one of those large corporate entities with a lot more, seemingly more money and cash resources than you have something that they don't. You always have something that a giant company won't have, and that is your ability to make change quickly. That is your ability to be able to adjust, to lean into your strengths, because you'll always have strengths that they can't do. You think about these larger companies, if they want to make a change to how they operate an attraction or something that they're going to add into the facility, they have to go through many, many layers of red tape in order to get it processed, because rolling that out to a bunch of centers takes effort and time, and you will always be able to move much faster than they can. And I think that is something that constraint of not having that same resource can actually be to your benefit, because you can make those decisions immediately. You can get that feedback that Russ was talking about earlier from those customers and be able to take that feedback and implement change in order to improve your experience almost overnight. And so those are things that it's important to remember. You always have strengths. You always have areas where you can outthink and be creative.
Well, and the final thing that really had struck me as I'm going through this book as well, and to that point, Danny, is you can always do something that's unique and novel. Like, they have this idea of plussing, and plussing means to give your guests more than what they paid for, more than what they expect, to the point where it seems ridiculous or can amaze them. And so it's, you think about areas that this can work well. Like, are you given just some crazy additional bonus redemption points? Are you giving out some game cards, for free? Are you giving them a little bit something extra? Not a little bit something extra. See what I did? I just played small, and that's not okay. But what's a big surprise and delight moment that you can do with that? Because again, if it is with a game card value that's maybe for a callback or the next time that they come there, inherently that the true, cost or versus the value of what that is remarkably different. So think about these things of what are things that actually cost us a small amount that we can be very generous with and have such a bigger impact and perceived value with the guests, because those are things that are not done by a lot of folks. And it's a really fantastic way to stand out. Right. And so it just always looking at this concept of how do we give them more than what they can expect, and that can be a really secret sauce piece to it. So I've really enjoyed getting into the book, so far. We haven't finished it yet, but holy moly, do I recommend, people looking at this as a great opportunity. Fans first. It's such a fun and cheeky read as well. The audiobook is fantastic. It's what I'm listening to, and really encourage you guys to go and sink your teeth into it, because it's got some phenomenal examples of how they are surprising and delighting people through the most mundane aspects of what you would expect a guest experience to be.
It's not often that any of us at Creative Works will be partway through reading a book and start recommending it to other people. So normally we get through an entire book, we digest, we implement, and we are in the process of implementing while listening. But that's, I think, a really good recommendation there from Russ.
Yeah. Definitely so. So with that, we've got more awesome content coming your guys' way through our weekly episodes, especially now that we're past year 1. So thank you all so much for being a part of this. We're so glad to hear back from you guys of that it's serving and having a positive impact. That's what it's all about. We want to be able to have fun and nerd out, but also have it be something that moves the needle for you guys. So if there's content that you guys want to hear or you have ideas, let us know as well.
Yeah, if you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
And leave us those 5 stars, please, and thank you.
If you've got ideas for future guests, follow us on social media, send us a DM.
Absolutely, and big shout out to Mikey Mike on the 1s and 2s working that Ultranet, and thank you all again for joining us. We'll see you on the next one, Troublemakers.
That felt good.
Yeah, I like it. To your guests in your facilities. I'm going to try that again. Through creative problem solving, too much. We're doing too much. 3rd time's a charm. That's why they call me 3-time Russ.
He was number 1.
He was number 1.
I like how you move during that when it's he needs a still.
Yeah. All
Anticipate
of it.
my needs.
Anticipating Chip. Yeah, get me ham in here. Nobody gets paid. Okay, cool. All
right. I feel ready. Positive energy.
Positive energy.